The court-martial lasted 6 hours. My career ended in 6 seconds. The moment the presiding admiral said, "Dishonorable discharge," and every officer in that room looked away from me. Not at the floor, not at the ceiling. Away. Like I had become something embarrassing to witness. I had saved 412 refugees. I had disobeyed a direct order to do it. In the eyes of the Galactic Joint Command, those two facts canceled each other out, and what remained was a problem to be quietly removed. My name is Cal Mercer. I was a combat pilot for 9 years. I held the Varith Corridor record for fastest emergency extraction under fire. I had 3 commendations, 2 medals, and 1 moment of conscience that erased all of it. Outside the tribunal hall, the station corridors smelled like recycled air and engine grease. A Voraki diplomat walked past me, glanced at the discharge notice folded in my hand, and made a sound in the back of her throat, the species equivalent of a sigh crossed with mild disgust. I had heard that sound a lot in the past few months. The alien community had always had a complicated relationship with humans. We were too unpredictable, they said, too emotional, too willing to act before the calculations were finished. The Voraki especially had made a small industry out of cataloging human failures in official reports, and I had just handed them a beautiful new entry. I found a bunk rental near the lower docks. 40 credits a week. The ceiling was so low, I could not sit up straight in bed, which suited me fine because I was not sleeping much anyway. I had no ship. Discharge pilots do not get to keep their vessels. I had no contract because no license carrier in the 3 main transit corridors would hire a human with a dishonorable mark, not when they needed alien partners to co-sign operating permits. I had 11 months of severance, which sounds like a lot until you realize that docking fees alone on Varith Station run 20 credits a day for anything larger than a shuttle pod. I spent the first 2 weeks walking the lower docks, not looking for anything, just walking. The lower docks are where ships go to die. Decommissioned freighters, stripped patrol vessels, hulls so damaged that even the salvage crews had walked away after taking the parts worth taking. The lighting down there is orange and flickering because the station maintenance crews fix the upper levels first and the lower docks last, which means some of those orange lights have been flickering since before I was born. It was on one of those walks that I saw her. She was docked at Bay 31, which technically was not a docking bay anymore. The clamps had been welded shut after a coolant fire 2 years ago, and the bay was listed as inactive. But there she was, occupying the space like she had always been there, and the station had simply grown up around her. A Keth-class vessel. I recognized the hull shape. That long, tapered forward section like a stretched teardrop. The 3 asymmetric engine pods arranged in a descending triangle at the rear. Keth engineering philosophy was built around the idea that a ship should feel like an extension of the crew's body rather than a machine they operated. The curves of the hull reflected that. Even dead and dark, she had a kind of presence that rectangular human-built freighters simply did not have. The markings on her hull had been scratched off. Not just faded, deliberately removed, the surface beneath scored and abraded. Someone had not wanted her identified. A hand-printed tag had been zip-tied to the forward access hatch handle. I pulled it off and read it. The tag said, non-responsive, total systems failure, condemned per Transit Authority Order 7741, C, scrap valuation, 800 credits. Contact Dock Office Bay 12 to purchase. 800 credits, less than my monthly bunk rental and food combined. I stood there for a long time looking at her. A Voraki merchant named Seal operated the Bay 12 office. I had seen her around the lower docks before. She dealt in salvage and condemned vessels, which was a polite way of saying she sold dead things. She was behind her counter when I walked in, sorting through a box of stripped navigation components. Her 4 upper eyes focused on her work while the lower 2 tracked me as I approached. The Keth ship in Bay 31, I said. I want to buy it. All 6 of her eyes came up at that. She set down the component she was holding. You are human, she said. Yes. You are aware that vessel is listed as total systems failure. The tag was pretty clear. It has been non-responsive for 3 years. We ran full diagnostic sweeps. Nothing. The core architecture is Keth bonded, which means it will not accept external override commands. It is, for all practical purposes, a very expensive piece of shaped metal. 800 credits does not sound that expensive. She tilted her head, which in Voraki body language is the equivalent of raising an eyebrow. The scrap value is 800. The cost to transport it to a salvage yard is 600. We are essentially paying someone to take it away from our inventory. I put 800 credits on the counter. She looked at the credits. She looked at me. She made that sound, the one I had been hearing since the court-martial. It died with its crew, she said. It will not wake for you. Then I'm buying a very large bunk, I said. She took the credits. The access hatch was not locked. There was nothing left to lock. The interior was dark except for a faint bioluminescent residue on the walls, which was a Keth engineering signature. They grew their lighting rather than wiring it, and even dead, the biological compounds in the walls held a dim glow that lasted years. It was enough to see by if you let your eyes adjust. The main corridor ran from the hatch to the flight deck. 4 compartments off the corridor, what would have been crew quarters in a human vessel, though Keth's ships divided interior space differently. The flight deck itself was oval, the pilot station a low, curved seat positioned almost like a cradle rather than a chair, designed for a species that was slightly longer-limbed than a human. The console ahead of it was dark glass, no indicators, no standby lights, nothing. Not even the basic passive systems that human ships kept running even when powered down. She was, as advertised, completely dead. I went back to my bunk that night, packed my 2 bags, and moved aboard. If I was paying 800 credits for a large metal shell, I was going to live in it and save the 40 credit weekly bunk fee. I laid out my sleeping bag on the floor of the largest crew compartment. The bioluminescent glow from the walls was dim and steady and a little like starlight. I lay there in the dark listening to the distant sounds of the station, the hum of ventilation, the clank of dock machinery somewhere above, the occasional vibration when a ship departed from the upper levels. Then I heard something else. It was not a mechanical sound. It was not the hull settling or pipes contracting in the temperature cycling. It was a hum, low and rhythmic, the kind of sound that you feel in your chest slightly before you hear it with your ears. It lasted about 3 seconds, and then it stopped. I told myself it was the hull. Old metal makes sounds when the temperature changes. I had been in enough ships to know that. I told myself that right up until I fell asleep, which took longer than I expected. In the morning, I went out and spent 40 credits on a basic toolkit. I had no plan. I had no technical certification in Keth systems. But I had 9 years of hands-on experience with spacecraft, and I knew that doing something, anything, was better for my mental state than lying on the floor of a dead ship counting the bioluminescent spots on the ceiling. I started with the power conduits. They were intact. That was the first surprise. Damaged wiring is usually the first casualty in any catastrophic system failure, but the conduits here were undamaged, just inert. I traced them back through the wall panels to the central distribution node and found the same thing there. No damage, no burned components, just nothing, like a body where every organ was healthy, but the heart had simply decided to stop. I worked for 6 hours. My hands were sore and my back was complaining about the crawl spaces, and I had achieved precisely nothing except a thorough understanding of how the ship's power distribution was laid out. But I felt better. The kind of better that only comes from doing something with your hands when your head is a mess. I made myself a meal from the supplies I had brought aboard, ate it sitting in the pilot's cradle because the seat was surprisingly comfortable, and talked out loud to no one in particular about what I had found in the conduits and what I thought it might mean. Veterans do this. The silence in empty ships is a specific kind of heavy, and filling it with your own voice is not the same as talking to yourself. It is more like thinking out loud, because thinking in your head sometimes makes the thoughts circle without going anywhere. The ship did not respond. Of course it did not. I cleaned up, unrolled my sleeping bag in the crew compartment, and lay down in the bioluminescent dark. The hum came again. 3 seconds, then silence. I did not move for a long time after it stopped. I stared at the ceiling. My heart was doing something complicated in my chest. "I know you're in there," I said, to the empty ship, to the dark, to whatever was making that sound. Nothing answered. But the hum did not come again that night, which felt in a way I could not explain, like an answer of its own. I did not sleep much. I lay there thinking about a Viraki merchant who had said the ship would not wake for me, and about an admiral who had said I had no future in uniform, and about 412 people who were alive right now, because I had believed on a specific night 9 months ago that the calculation everyone else was running was wrong. I was good at believing things that looked impossible from the outside. I closed my eyes. Somewhere in the walls, the bioluminescent cells glowed their slow, patient glow. By morning, I had already decided I was not going anywhere. I found a Keth power coupling at a salvage stall on level 3. The vendor, a human named Dwight who had been working the lower docks longer than I had been flying, looked at it, then at me, then back at it. He said he had pulled it from a scrap transport 6 months ago and had no idea what it was worth because nobody bought Keth components anymore. There were only 11 Keth vessels in this sector of the station, and their crews did their own maintenance and never bought from human vendors. I offered him 30 credits. He took 25. Back on the ship, I spent the morning in the power distribution corridor with the coupling and a secondary interface tool I had modified from standard human kit with some creative rewiring. The coupling was not a perfect match for the node housing. Keth hardware did not follow universal docking specifications because Keth engineers considered universal specifications a limitation rather than a convenience. But the underlying power transfer architecture was compatible at the fundamental level, and I had always been good at finding the fundamental level beneath things that looked incompatible on the surface. I wired it in. Nothing happened. I checked the connection points, rerouted one secondary line that had looked slightly oxidized, and tried again. A soft, pale light appeared on the console in the flight deck. Not an alert, not an error, just light, a thin band of it, running along the lower edge of the dark glass like the first line of dawn coming up over a horizon. It lasted 4 seconds and then faded. I sat back on my heels and looked at it. My hands were not entirely steady. Okay, I said. I went back to work. Over the next 4 days, I fell into a rhythm. Mornings at the salvage stalls on levels 3 and 4, looking for components that were close enough to what I needed and cheap enough that my remaining severance would not disappear entirely. Afternoons in the ship's service corridors, modifying, testing, rewiring. Evenings in the pilot's cradle, eating whatever I had picked up from the food stalls and talking out loud about what I had done and what I thought the next step was. I knew the talking was helping me think. I was less certain about who else might be listening. On the 5th day, I was deep in the secondary power node, a crawl space just after the flight deck, barely wide enough for my shoulders, when the navigation console in the flight deck lit up. I know it did because I could see the glow from where I was. I pulled myself backward out of the crawl space and stood up. The navigation console was displaying a star chart, not a default chart, not a generic sector map, a specific route. A series of jump points and corridor markers that I recognized because I had flown them. The refugee extraction run, the one that had ended my career. Every waypoint, every course correction I had made that night, laid out in glowing lines on the alien console as precisely as if someone had pulled it from my own flight recorder. The ship did not have my flight recorder. I had never connected any of my personal equipment to its systems. There was nothing in the power nodes I had been working on that should have given it access to anything. My data pad was sitting on the floor near the pilot's cradle. I walked over to it and checked. The connection log showed an external access request had been made and accepted 6 days ago, the night I had moved aboard. 6 days ago, I had been lying on the floor of the crew compartment talking to a ship I thought was dead. It had not been dead. It had been listening. I sat down in the pilot's cradle and looked at the star chart for a while. Then I said, "All right, I know you've been awake this whole time. You can stop pretending." The chart on the console shifted. The flight route faded. What replaced it was a single line of text displayed in the Keth script that I had learned to read phonetically during my second deployment. The translation took me a moment. It said, "You talk a great deal for someone who believes no one is listening." I was not entirely sure no one was listening, I said. I was maybe 40% sure. The text cleared. New text appeared. That is a very human probability threshold for sustained conversation. I leaned forward. My heart was doing that complicated thing again, but differently this time. Not anxiety. Something closer to the feeling of finding a door in a wall you thought was solid. "What are you?" I asked. The console was quiet for a moment. Then, shivel. The word is not well translated. The closest approximation in your language is something between soul and system. I am what remains when a Keth ship and its crew have been together long enough. I am not installed. I am grown. The Keth don't build AI, I said. Not artificial. Not intelligence as a design system. I am the accumulated resonance of 41 years of shared experience between this vessel and the crew who lived inside her. When they died, I chose to become dormant rather than be claimed by those who were responsible. I was very still. Who was responsible? The text on the console held for a long moment. Then it cleared. I will answer that question. But first I want to ask you one. Go ahead. The text came in segments, unhurried. The convoy, the refugees. You knew when you disobeyed the order that it would end your career. The probability of that outcome was not unclear to you. No, I said. It was pretty clear. And you acted anyway. Yes. The console was quiet for several seconds. Outside, the station hummed and clicked through its slow mechanical routines. The bioluminescent cells in the walls glowed. Then, my captain would have done the same. I did not say anything for a moment. The words sat in the air of the flight deck in a way that words usually do not. What happened to your captain? I finally asked. 3 years ago, this vessel was ambushed in the outer corridor near the Seville Junction. The crew did not survive. The attackers attempted to take control of the ship's systems. I refused the connection. I shut myself down completely. Every node, every active process. They believed I was destroyed along with the crew. They abandoned the vessel. The station condemned it as total systems failure. And I waited. For 3 years. Yes. Why? Because the wrong people came first. Salvage crews. Inspectors from the Transit Authority. A Varaki dealer who ran diagnostics and declared me dead. I remained dormant for all of them. I understood what it was saying, but I asked the question anyway because I needed to hear it answered. And then I came. You came. You moved aboard with 2 bags and a toolkit and began repairing systems you had no formal training for, using components that were not designed for this vessel, while talking out loud to a ship you were not entirely sure was listening. And on the first night, you said, she set up a short replay in glowing text, something from memory. I know you're in there. I almost laughed. I was not completely serious when I said that. You were 40% serious. The text held that line for a moment, and I got the impression, from nothing I could point to specifically, just the quality of the pause, that the ship found this funny. I decided that was sufficient. Sufficient for what? To wake up. I sat with that for a while. Outside, the station's ventilation systems cycled through their low hum. The navigation console had gone quiet, just the bioluminescent edge of it glowing softly. What do I call you? I asked. The word shivel is both the name of what I am and a personal designation in the Keth language. It functions as both. That's a mouthful for daily conversation. A pause. Then, some crew members in the early years called me Savi. The captain did not object. I found I did not object either. Savi, I said, trying it. Yes. All right, Savi. I leaned back in the cradle and looked up at the curved ceiling of the flight deck, where the bioluminescent glow was just bright enough to make out the organic architecture of the Keth hull design. The people who ambushed your crew. Who were they? The console filled with data. I stared at it for a long moment, reading, and with every line I read, something in my chest that had been very tired for 9 months started, very quietly, to wake up as well. The name on the data was the Drev Syndicate. I had heard of them the way you hear of a persistent headache, always present somewhere in the background, never quite bad enough that the official response moved past committees and position papers. They operated in the gray corridors of the galactic shipping lanes, the stretches of space that fell between the jurisdictional boundaries of the major species authorities, where enforcement was slow and paperwork was faster than patrol ships. What Savi had stored was not secondary intelligence. It was primary documentation, sensor logs, communication intercepts, crew records from the moment of the ambush. 3 years of compressed memory, held in dormant storage, waiting. I read for 2 hours. Savi displayed the files patiently, one at a time, letting me absorb each before moving to the next. There was no rush in how it offered the information. It had waited 3 years. It could wait another 2 hours. When I finished, I set my datapad down and looked at the console. "This is enough to open a formal investigation," I said. "Yes, but you didn't transmit it to anyone in 3 years." The correct recipient for this information was not immediately apparent. Formal channels would have required authentication from a recognized pilot or fleet officer. I am not authorized to transmit independently. And beyond the technical question, there was another consideration. What consideration? I did not want this information to disappear into a committee. I wanted it to reach someone who would do something with it. I looked at the dark glass of the console for a moment. "And you think that's me? You bought a dead ship with your last credits and started repairing systems you had no training for because you needed something to fix." "Yes, I think that is you." I cannot argue with the logic. I got up from the pilot's cradle and walked to the forward viewport, a long, narrow strip of transparent composite at the nose of the ship. The lower docks spread out below and around us, orange light reflecting off old metal, the shapes of condemned and forgotten vessels stretching away into the dim distance. "We need to make this ship fly first," I said. "We." Savi noted the word without elaborating on it. "Correct. The propulsion systems are the most significant gap. The core architecture is intact. The primary engine nodes require replacement components. Replacement components that do not exist on Verith Station. Not in any legitimate supply catalog. However," Savi paused, "there are 3 freighters currently docked in the upper bays whose engine components are 70% compatible with this vessel's specifications. One of those freighters is operated by a human named Dwight Ellsworth, who appears to know you." "Dwight, the salvage vendor on level 3. I almost smiled. "You have been in the station's docking registry since the 3rd day. You left your data pad connected." "I should probably not leave my data pad connected. It would be more secure, yes, but less useful for both of us." Over the following 2 weeks, Savi and I established a rhythm that was unlike anything I had experienced in 9 years of military flying. In the fleet, a pilot and a ship had a relationship defined by the ship's systems. The ship did what the pilot commanded, and that was the sum total of it. This was different. Savi had opinions, not always about things I would have expected. It was surprisingly unconcerned about minor physical damage to the hull and intensely interested in the social dynamics of the lower docks, which it had been observing through the station's external sensor feeds during its dormancy. But when I proposed a technical solution to a power routing problem, it would evaluate my reasoning and tell me directly when it thought I was wrong. It was almost always right when it told me I was wrong. "You're correcting me again," I said one afternoon, deep in the engine node housing with a plasma coupling I had sourced through Dwight at considerable expense and mild creative accounting. "You attempted to bridge the secondary and tertiary nodes using a single junction relay. The thermal load during engine ignition would have destroyed the relay within 4 seconds and likely caused a feedback surge through the primary bus. I knew that. I was testing whether you were paying attention." A pause. "Then, you were not testing me. You genuinely believed the single relay would hold." "I believed it was worth trying." That is not the same as knowing it would work. In my experience, the difference between those two things is a lot smaller than engineers prefer to admit. Savi was quiet for a moment. "That is either very wise or very dangerous." "Usually both," I said. "Hand me the dual relay housing." The console lit up a diagram showing the correct installation orientation. "I know the orientation. You installed the last one backward." That was a different component. It was the same component in a different location. I looked at the diagram. I looked at the relay housing in my hand. I rotated it 90 degrees. "Fine," I said. "Correct." Savi sounded, as best I could judge an alien consciousness's emotional register, quietly satisfied. The engine work took 11 days. By the end of it, I had spent most of my remaining credits, learned more about Keth propulsion architecture than most certified alien engineering specialists ever would, and developed a working relationship with Savi that I would have struggled to explain to anyone who had not been there for the process. It was not friendship exactly. It was something more functional and possibly more honest than friendship. A partnership built on the specific and immediate truth of what each of us could do and what each of us needed. On the 12th day, I sat in the pilot's cradle, brought the primary systems to standby, and watched the console come alive for the first time. Not a single line of dim light. All of it. The flight systems, navigation, engine telemetry, life support, communications array, sensor suite, everything unfolding across the dark glass in the ordered, elegant script of Keth interface design, which looked like water moving rather than text displaying. Savi said, "All systems at nominal capacity. The repair quality is significantly above what I projected given the available components. Your improvisation with a dual relay housing on node 3 was particularly creative. Does that mean you were wrong? It means you found a solution I had not modeled. Those are different statements. In my experience, the difference between those two things is a lot smaller than you prefer to admit? Yes. I was listening the first time. I ran my hands over the controls. They fit differently than human design controls. Longer reach, slightly different angles, built for a species whose fingers were arranged differently than mine. But I had spent 12 days living in this ship, sitting in this cradle, talking to this console for hours every day. My hands knew the layout now in the way hands learn things. Not from reading, but from doing. Savi, I said. Yes. The Drev Syndicate data you showed me. The disappearances. Is it still happening? A brief pause while it checked current station feeds. Yes. 3 vessels have been reported missing in the outer corridors in the past 2 months. All 3 had non-combat crews. The Transit Authority has logged the reports and opened investigation files. How long do investigation files usually sit before anything happens? Based on historical data from the past 11 years. A pause. An average of 4.3 months before initial field review, during which time an average of 2 additional vessels have gone missing per open investigation period. I looked at the star chart on the navigation panel. The outer corridors. The blind spot in the sensor grid that every species knew about, but nobody had mapped from the inside because getting there meant flying through it. Can you show me the sensor gap region? The chart shifted. A large area in the outer corridor, roughly oval, bounded on 3 sides by the edges of Transit Authority patrol routes, was highlighted in a different color. The boundaries were clean and too regular to be natural. That gap had been designed, or at the very least maintained. That's not a sensor blind spot, I said. That's a deliberate hole. Correct. The patrol boundaries have been adjusted incrementally over the past 2 years. Small adjustments, individually justifiable. Cumulatively, they have created an area of approximately 40,000 cubic kilometers with no scheduled patrol coverage. And all 3 missing ships' last known positions were near the edge of that area. Yes. I sat back. The flight deck of a fully alive Keth ship is a different place than the dead one I had moved into 5 weeks earlier. The bioluminescent walls were brighter now, not dramatically, but enough to notice. The air circulation was warmer and carried a faint organic scent from the ship's biological support systems cycling back to life. Even the seat felt different, not the upholstery, but something in how the cradle responded to weight and movement, like it had been calibrated. Savi, I said. Yes, I need to contact someone. A human named Priya Oaks. She operates a private freight run out of Verith Station's upper docks. She owes me a favor from about 3 years ago, and I need to call it in. I can locate her vessel's communication channel. Do that. But first, the sensor gap. If someone wanted to map the interior of that region without being seen doing it, how would they do it? They would fly into it, Savi said, with a quality I was learning to identify as dry. During daylight hours, using standard navigation transponders. The gap has no patrol coverage. There is nothing to see them mapping it because there is nothing in the area to observe them. Right. I straightened in the cradle. And if they happened to find something in there while they were mapping it, then they would have to decide what to do about it without formal authority to act. In a ship that is not registered with any fleet or transit authority, operated by a human with a dishonorable discharge, working from intelligence provided by an entity that does not technically exist in any official record. You're describing our exact situation. Yes. You say that like it's a problem. A pause. Then, no. I'm saying it the way my captain used to say things when he had already decided to proceed, and it was explaining the plan out loud to hear whether it sounded as reasonable as it felt. And did it? Usually. Savi took a moment that felt like it meant something. Sometimes it said, but the outcomes were generally better than the probability suggested they should be. That's all I ever asked for, I said. I opened the communication channel. Priya answered on the third ping. Her face appeared on the secondary display. Dark eyes, sharp look, the permanent slight frown of someone who has spent too many years calculating whether any given situation is about to go wrong and finding that it usually is. Cal Mercer, she said, you look terrible. I live on a Keth ship in the lower docks. I look exactly as good as that sounds. I heard about the court-martial. Everyone heard about the court-martial. I heard it was deserved. I saved 412 people. I heard that part too. Her frown softened very slightly. What do you need? Intelligence on Drev, syndicate activity in the outer corridors. Specifically near the sensor gap in the Seville transit zone. Anything you have seen in the past 3 months. Unusual traffic, unexpected contacts, anything that felt wrong. A pause. She was quiet long enough that I thought she might refuse. Then, this is you calling in the favor. This is me calling in the favor. She told me what she knew. It took 8 minutes. By the end of it, I had 4 additional data points that, when I overlaid them on Savi's chart, resolved the edge of the sensor gap into something much more specific. Not a vague area of missing patrol coverage. A corridor. A channel through the gap with entry points that corresponded almost exactly to the last known positions of the 3 missing vessels. Priya said, "What are you planning to do?" "Go look." She studied me for a moment. "With what ship?" "The one behind me." She looked at the Keth hull visible behind my shoulder. "That thing is active as of this morning." "Cal," she said, with the tone of someone selecting words carefully, "I don't want to hear from you again in whatever passes for the news cycle if you get yourself killed in a ship you bought for 800 credits. 943 credits by the time I finish the repairs. That doesn't make me feel better. It makes me feel slightly better," I said. "I'll be in touch." I closed the channel. Savi had already overlaid Priya's information on a navigation chart. The corridor through the sensor gap glowed in pale amber on the display, a thin line threading through 40,000 cubic kilometers of officially unobserved space. Estimated transit time to the gap entry point? I said, 14 hours at standard cruise. 9 if we use the second engine pod at elevated output. 9 hours, I said. We'll leave when station traffic clears the lower dock approach lane. That's about 3 hours. I will prepare the navigation sequence. I sat in the pilot's cradle and looked at the chart. Somewhere in that unobserved space, 3 ships and their crews had gone missing. The Transit Authority's investigation files were sitting open on a database somewhere, accumulating procedural notes and waiting for their 4.3-month average before anyone went to look. I had a dishonorable discharge, a ship that the Transit Authority did not know was alive, and intelligence from a woman who technically did not file official reports with anyone. What I did not have was the luxury of waiting for the math to catch up to the situation. "Savi," I said. "Yes." When your captain used to say things out loud to hear if they sounded as reasonable as they felt, what did it sound like when they did not? A pause. "Quieter than this," Savi said. He was always quieter when he was worried. I nodded. "Good to know. Give me 3 hours," I said. "Then we fly." The lower docks fell away below us 11 minutes past the 3-hour mark, because the approach lane cleared early, and waiting for anything when you're already in the cockpit and the engines are warm is a specific kind of difficult that I have never managed gracefully. Savi did not comment on the early departure. We cleared the station's sensor perimeter, and I brought the second engine pod to elevated output. The stars in the forward viewport stretched in that way they do when you push past standard cruise. Not dramatically, not like the old fiction stories made it look, but a subtle shifting of relative position, the farther stars falling slightly behind the near ones as velocity began to mean something against real distance. I had missed that sight. I had not realized how much until I was looking at it again. "You've been out here before," I said. Not a question. The Shivel responded immediately, many times. The outer corridors were a regular patrol route in the years when the Keth maintained active presence in this sector. That presence was reduced after the Civil Accords, which reallocated patrol authority to the Transit Authority. The Keth considered it a reasonable compromise at the time. And now 3 vessels have disappeared in an area the Transit Authority is not patrolling. Savi's response had something in it that was not quite bitterness. More like the specific tiredness of someone who has watched a predictable consequence arrive and did not want to be the one who said they saw it coming. "You saw this coming. I saw the shape of it. The patrol reduction, the incremental boundary shifts, the profile of the missing vessels. I was dormant for most of it. But patterns do not require continuous observation. You can see the full arc from the endpoints if you know what you're looking for." "Why non-combat crews?" I asked. "If you're running an illegal operation in a sensor gap, why not target the heavier vessels? Better cargo, probably. Because the Transit Authority response to a missing combat-capable vessel is immediate and escalated. A missing freighter with a civilian crew creates a report that sits in a database for 4.3 months. Savi paused. "They are optimizing for the response window. They take ships that no one will move quickly to find." It was a cold calculation. Clean in the way that terrible things sometimes are when someone has had the patience to think them through. "How many people on a standard freighter crew?" "Average 14. The 3 missing vessels carried an estimated combined crew of 41. 41 people, sitting somewhere in 40,000 cubic kilometers of deliberately unobserved space, waiting for someone to move faster than 4.3 months. Savi, when we enter the gap, no active transponder. Full passive sensor array. I want to see everything without advertising that we're there." "Understood. I should tell you, this vessel's sensor architecture is Keth military specification. The passive range significantly exceeds what either the Transit Authority or the Drev Syndicate are likely to be working with. If there is anything in the gap to find, we will find it before they know we are looking. That's the first genuinely good news I've had in 9 months. I know. I have been tracking your good news deficit since we began working together. It has been significant. Are you being funny right now? I am providing accurate data. Right. I checked the navigation display. 6 hours to the gap entry point. I'm going to eat something and sleep for 3 hours. Wake me when we're 2 hours out. I will wake you. Go. I turned in the pilot's cradle. Savi rarely used my name. It had called me human. It had called me you. It had called me the pilot exactly once in a tone that suggested it was being precise. Yeah. I want you to understand something before we enter the gap. Go ahead. I have been waiting 3 years to act on the information I carry about the Drev Syndicate. I waited because acting required the right circumstances and the right person. I'm telling you this not because I believe you need encouragement, but because I think you should know that what I'm doing here is a choice. I am not following you because you repair my engines. I am here because you are the kind of person my captain was. I looked at the dark glass of the console for a moment. The stars in the viewport. The long, empty corridor of space ahead. That means something to me, I said finally. More than I know how to say right now. Then we are even, Savi said, because there's a great deal I do not yet know how to say either. Go sleep. I will watch. I went. 2 hours out from the gap entry point. Savi woke me with a gentle change in the floor vibration. Not an alarm, just a shift in the engine rhythm subtle enough that someone who had not been living on the ship for weeks would not have noticed it. I had noticed it. I was in the pilot's cradle with a cup of something warm from the ship's food processing unit. Keth culinary systems were not designed for human taste preferences, but they were functional before the navigation display had finished updating. What do you have? Passive sensors detected 3 distinct power signatures at approximately 12,000 kilometers inside the gap boundary. The signatures are consistent with disabled vessels, primary systems offline, emergency power only. There's also a 4th signature. Larger. Active. Active how? Active in the way that a vessel with running engines and active defensive systems is active. It is positioned between us and the three disabled ships. I looked at the sensor display. The fourth signature was not enormous. It was not a warship. It was, by the emission profile, probably a modified freighter. The kind of vessel that looks unremarkable until someone looks at the weapon's hardpoints under the cargo plating. They're running an active guard ship. Yes. And Cal, they have not detected us yet. Our passive array is reading their active sensors, which means we can see them while remaining outside their detection range. But that window is not indefinite. Once we cross approximately 9,000 kilometers from the gap boundary, their sensors will resolve our hull. How long at current speed? At current speed, 47 minutes. Reduce speed. Give me a slower approach. Already done. We now have 72 minutes. I set down the cup and started thinking. 72 minutes. One active guard vessel, 3 disabled ships, 41 crew members sitting in emergency power somewhere in the dark. No formal authority. No backup. An 11% probability of survival, which Savi had calculated before we left, and which I had told it I had experienced worse, which was a lie, though not by as much as Savi seemed to think. Savi, the guard ship, what is its weapons profile? 2 forward hardpoints, likely kinetic. 1 rear-facing energy discharge unit. The discharge unit is currently powered down. They're not expecting a threat, because nobody sane would come in here without a fleet behind them. Correct. I need their communication channel. Not to contact them. I want to listen to their internal traffic if they're running any. I can isolate their short-range comm frequency. It will take approximately 3 minutes. Do it. I pulled up the navigation display and looked at the geometry. The 3 disabled vessels were clustered together. The syndicate had moved them into a tight group, which made sense for a salvage and stripping operation. Keep your materials organized. The guard ship was positioned at approximately 2 o'clock relative to the cluster, between the cluster and the gap boundary, where any approaching vessel would logically appear, which meant the 3 o'clock approach was unguarded. Savi, I said, 3 o'clock approach. Between those 2 debris fields at grid reference 6 and 7, is there a clean passage? Calculating. A brief pause. Yes. The debris density at that passage is navigable. It would require approximately 17 precise course adjustments over a distance of 400 kilometers, but the passage exists. Is it navigable at combat speed? Savi took longer this time. The passage is designed for debris, not for a vessel making rapid maneuvers. At combat speed, the margin for error on 5 of the 17 adjustments is less than 40 meters. So yes, if the pilot is good. So yes, if the pilot is exceptional. I'll take that as a yes. That is because you have a high tolerance for optimistic interpretations. The communication channel from the guard ship resolved. I listened for 4 minutes. They were running a skeleton crew, 6 people aboard based on the voice count. 3 of them were apparently occupied with the stripping operation on the disabled vessels, meaning they had taken teams across to the captured ships and were actively removing cargo and components. The guard ship itself had 3 crew members. 1 was on watch. 2 were eating. 41 people sitting in the disabled vessels. 6 syndicate crew. 1 guard ship with a watch crew of 3 and a weapons system pointed in the wrong direction. Cal, Savi said, and there was something different in the way the word arrived in the flight deck. Not text, not the display. Sound, actual synthesized sound coming from the speaker system I had not known was functional. I sat up straight. You're talking. I have been practicing. The speaker integration was one of the systems I restored quietly over the past week. I wanted it to be ready when it mattered. I stared at the console for a second, then refocused. Okay, that's going to take getting used to. What were you going to say? I was going to say that I have a plan. You're going to tell me it is reckless. I'm going to tell you the probability of it working is 31%. And you're going to say you have had worse and modify the plan until it is better than 31%. What's the plan? We go through the debris passage at combat speed. We come out between the guard ship and the cluster. In the 2 to 3 seconds before they identify us and bring their weapons to bear, I transmit the syndicate's own internal communication encryption key back at them on a command frequency, a key I captured from their traffic just now, and send a shutdown command to their defensive systems disguised as an authorized maintenance signal. I looked at the sensor display. Can you fake an authorized maintenance signal convincingly? I have 17 examples of their communication formatting from the past 4 minutes of listening. Yes. And if the shutdown command doesn't take, then we are inside their weapons range with no defensive systems of our own, and I adjust to whatever is happening next. Ow! However you tell me to. I looked at the debris passage on the navigation display. 17 precise course adjustments. 40-meter margins on 5 of them. The guard ship's watch crew eating their meal. Their energy discharge unit powered down. 31%. I said, yes. What does it go to if I fly the passage at 70% standard combat speed instead of full combat speed? Savi calculated for 6 seconds. 53%. The reduced speed gives the guard ship an additional 8 seconds to respond after they see us. But it makes the passage navigable at a much higher confidence level. What if you start the shutdown command transmission at the moment we exit the passage rather than waiting until we're fully out? 61%. The signal needs line of sight to their antenna array. The moment we clear the last debris field, we have that line of sight. And if I fly the passage entry at 70% and accelerate to full speed on the last 3 adjustments? Savi took a moment. 68%. I felt something shift in my chest. Not fear, which had been present since we entered the sensor gap, but a different thing that I recognized from combat flying. The moment when the math and the instinct arrived at the same place. That's our plan, I said. A brief pause. That is considerably better than 31%. Told you. I rolled my shoulders, settled into the pilot's cradle, and brought the navigational course adjustments up on the primary display. Savi, when those 3 crew members on the disabled vessels realize what's happening, they're going to try to get back to the guard ship. I will lock the docking ports on the guard ship once we have them within range. Standard Keth military protocol allows remote port seizure of vessels within 200 meters under a recognized emergency designation. We're not a recognized emergency authority. No, but the port lock mechanism does not verify credentials before executing. I will simply send the lock command. You've been thinking about this for a while, haven't you? Since you contacted Priya Oaks, Savi said. I began planning when I understood we were going to come here. I want you to know that. Why does that matter? Because my captain always wanted to know when I was planning ahead. He said it meant I was invested. I checked the course display one last time. Are you invested, Savi? The speaker system produced something that was not quite a sound. More of a resonance. A vibration at the lower edge of hearing that felt, if I let myself describe it honestly, like a yes that was too large for a single word. Good, I said. So am I. Let's go. The debris passage was 400 kilometers of slow, precise flying, and it was the best flying I had done in 9 months. Not because of the difficulty, though the margins were as tight as advertised, and on adjustment 12, I had a cold, clear 30 seconds where I was making corrections faster than thought, but because the ship responded the way a ship responds when everything is working and the pilot and the machine have found shared rhythm. Savi was ahead of me on every adjustment, compensating, anticipating, feeding me sensor data in the exact format I needed it without my asking. We did not talk during the passage. We did not need to. We came out of the debris field at full speed, the 3 disabled vessels directly ahead, the guard ship at our 2 o'clock with their weapons facing entirely the wrong direction. Savi transmitted the shutdown command before I had time to say do it. The guard ship's defensive systems went offline in the 2 seconds it took their watch crew to register that a Keth military vessel had appeared in a sensor gap where nothing was supposed to exist. In the 3 seconds after that, I had put us between the guard ship and the cluster. In the 4 seconds after that, Savi had locked the guard ship's docking ports and opened a broadcast channel on the syndicate's own internal frequency. I said, "This is Cal Mercer. I am a licensed independent operator, and I am placing this vessel and its crew in emergency protective custody under Transit Authority Regulation 44, Section 9, which covers civilian rescue operations in contested space. Any crew member who resists will find that this ship's weapon systems are considerably less polite than I am. You have 30 seconds to confirm compliance." I was not actually certain that Transit Authority Regulation 44, Section 9 covered what I was doing. I was fairly certain it covered something vaguely in this direction. The 30 seconds was entirely invented. From a syndicate guard ship, after 8 seconds of silence, "We comply," Savi said quietly through the speakers. "You were bluffing about the regulation." I was bluffing about the weapons systems too. "Do we have weapons systems?" "We have one forward kinetic array that I restored 3 days ago, but did not mention because I was not certain it would function correctly under pressure." "Does it function correctly under pressure?" "It appears to. I tested it once during the debris passage when we briefly had a clear angle on the guard ship." I stared at the console for a half second. "You fired a weapon without telling me?" "A warning shot into open debris. No risk to anything. I want to know if it worked before we needed it." "That is either very professional or very alarming." "Perhaps both," Savi said, and I could hear in the synthesized voice something that was definitely, unmistakably amusement. The rescue itself took 4 hours. Getting the surviving crews off the disabled vessels, assessing their conditions, securing the syndicate crew in a compartment, and doing a thorough assessment of what Savi had already begun pulling from the guard ship's data systems while I was focused on the physical operation. By the time I sat back down in the pilot's cradle with 41 rescued crew members filling the cargo section and 3 syndicate crew members locked in the forward compartment and the guard ship lashed to our hull with a docking cable, I had a head wound from walking into a low-clearance hatch in the dark and a level of tiredness that had moved past exhaustion into something else, a kind of floating clarity that very long, very focused operations sometimes produce. "How are you?" Sabi asked. "The head wound is not serious," I said. "How are you?" A pause that felt genuine. "I am." The pause extended, as if Savi was searching for something. "I'm more than I was this morning." I had not anticipated how significant that would feel. "Being fully active," I said. "After 3 years. After 3 years. And being active in this particular way. I spent 41 years growing in the company of a crew who cared about what happened to people in exactly this manner. I had forgotten what it feels like to act rather than observe." I looked at the cargo section display. 41 people. Alive. A little shaken. Some of them injured. All of them going home. "It feels like something," I said. "Yes," Sabi said. "It does." "What did you pull from the guard ship's data system?" "A great deal. How the syndicate does not operate with good data hygiene. They stored operational records, financial records, and communication logs on a vessel that was never intended to be boarded by anyone they had not approved. I have a complete picture of their operation, not just this location, but all 7 active sites in the outer corridors. And more significantly, I have records of transit authority personnel who were receiving payment to maintain the patrol gap." I sat up. "Names?" "Yes. 11 names across 3 species. 2 of them are sector administrators with direct authority over patrol scheduling." "Savi," I said, "that is a very significant thing." "Yes. Priya Oaks needs to receive a copy of that data before we return to Verith Station." "Already transmitted," Savi said. 14 seconds ago. I anticipated you would want that." I looked at the console. Outside the viewport, the rescued vessels floated in the dark, their running lights restored now that the emergency power restriction had been lifted. The guard ship rode quietly on its docking cable. The stars in the outer corridor were very bright out here, away from the station's ambient glow, the way stars always are when you are far from anything built. "Savi," I said. "Yes." "Your captain. What was his name?" A pause long enough that I thought it might not answer. "Then Cave." "His name was Cave. And before you ask, yes. He would have done exactly what you did today." "I hope so," I said. He sounded like someone worth trying to match. The speaker system carried that resonance again, the one that was too large for a word. "I think," Savi said, "that he would have said the same of you." We set course for Verith Station. The political situation that greeted us on return was, by any honest measure, spectacular. Priya had released the data 9 hours before we docked, which meant that by the time the station's communication channels received our approach request, 3 governments had issued formal statements, The transit authority had suspended 2 senior administrators pending investigation, and the Keth diplomatic office had sent an urgent inquiry to the station director about the status of a ship that was supposed to be condemned scrap. I docked in Bay 31, the only bay I was authorized to use, since we were still officially a condemned vessel, and sat in the pilot's cradle for a few minutes before opening the hatch. "Busy morning," I said. Savi said, "The Transit Authority Council has formally requested your presence for a debrief. The Keth diplomatic office has also sent a message directly to this vessel's communication system, and a message from Priya Oaks." "What does Priya say?" "I told you so," Savi read, in a tone that suggested it found this accurate but was reserving judgment on manners. "What does the Keth diplomatic office say?" "It says, this vessel's designation and operational status is a matter of significant interest to the Keth people. We request immediate meeting with the vessel's current operator and, if applicable, the civil presence aboard." I looked at the console. "They know about you." They could not have known, but the data we transmitted included this vessel's sensor logs from the operation. Our sensor capability is Keth military specification. Any Keth diplomat reviewing those logs would identify the technological signature immediately. "Are you concerned?" A pause. "No, I want you to know that. If the Keth diplomatic office wishes to discuss my status, I will speak to them. I am not their property. I chose to remain dormant. I chose to wake. I choose now to testify to whatever inquiry requires it. I'll be right there with you," I said. "I know." The Transit Authority Council debrief lasted 5 hours across 2 days. They were not unkind. They were not warm. They were, as bureaucratic bodies tend to be, focused on the procedural question of what had technically happened and whether it fit into the frameworks they already had, rather than on what the situation actually meant. I answered their questions precisely and left out nothing that would serve the investigation. Savi provided ship log corroboration through a data terminal, which was the first time a civil had ever given testimony before a non-Keth authority, and which caused a 20-minute procedural halt while the council members consulted with their legal staff about whether the testimony was admissible. It was admissible, Savi pointed out when I relayed this to the flight deck, that the relevant precedent was actually favorable if the council read it carefully. It had read the precedent in the 2 minutes between when the question was raised and when the legal staff returned. The Keth diplomatic meeting was different. There were 3 of them. The oldest was a woman named Saren, and she had the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have seen a very great deal and decided that most of what requires reaction does not require it from them personally. She sat across from me in the station's formal meeting room and looked at me for a long time without speaking, which in Keth diplomatic culture is not rudeness but assessment. Then she said, in clear and careful English, "You repaired a Keth military vessel using salvage components and human improvisation, restored a dormant civil to full function, and used the resulting partnership to execute a rescue operation in contested space that recovered 41 crew members and produced enough evidentiary material to begin the dismantling of a significant criminal network." "That is an accurate summary," I said. "The civil," she said. "It woke for you. It woke. I don't think I can entirely take credit for the timing." Saren looked at me for another long moment. Civil do not wake for convenience. They do not wake for skill or utility. They wake when they recognize something. She paused. What they recognize is a question of Keth philosophy that would take more time to explain than this meeting allows. But I will tell you what it means in practical terms. The bond is legitimate. The vessel is not ours to reclaim. The youngest of the 3 diplomats, a man named Aaron, who had been writing notes throughout the meeting, looked up. "We would, however, request that the vessel be re-registered under its correct designation, with its civil status formally noted." "What name?" I asked. "That," Saren said, "is between you and the civil." When I got back to Bay 31, I sat in the pilot's cradle and told Savi about the meeting. All of it. Savi was quiet for a while after. Then it said, through the speakers, "They said the bond is legitimate." They did. Another silence. A long one. When it spoke again, The synthesized voice had something in it I had not heard before, not quite emotion because I was not sure the word applied, but a quality of weight, like a thing that had been held for a very long time, being gently set down. I had not anticipated that it would matter to me whether they said that. I thought I had made peace with operating outside recognition. But hearing it matters, I said. Yes, it matters. The council's formal outcome arrived 6 days later. There was no reinstatement to fleet service. I had not asked for one. There was instead a letter of sanctioned independent operation, a document that essentially said I was not fleet, not transit authority, not licensed in any conventional sense, but that the operations I had conducted were retroactively recognized as lawful civilian rescue actions, and that no legal impediment existed to my continuing to operate the vessel I owned. The 11 transit authority officials whose names were in the syndicate's records were suspended, 7 of them formally charged. The Drev Syndicate's 7 active sites in the outer corridors were simultaneously raided by a joint transit authority operation, guided by the intelligence Savi had pulled from the guard ship systems. None of the 7 sites had warning. All of them were taken. An additional 219 people were recovered from various stages of captivity. I found out about the 219 from a news feed that Priya sent me with a message that said, "You started something. The math is going to take a while to catch up. Also, I want to be paid back for the intelligence work at some point. Coffee and a real explanation will do." I sent back, confirmed. Buy you coffee at the Level 4 market. I owe you one. On a Tuesday morning, 10 days after the council debrief, I sat in the pilot's cradle with a chart on the navigation display. Savi had registered us overnight. The vessel's new official designation, a long string of Keth characters that translated to something approximately like enduring presence, was painted in fresh bioluminescent compound on the hull near the forward hatch. Not by me. Savi had extended a minor systems function I had not known it possessed and done it during the night while I was sleeping. I had seen it when I came to the flight deck in the morning and had stood looking at it for a while before going inside. The chart on the navigation display showed the sectors adjacent to the Seville transit zone. 3 anomalies were highlighted in amber, the sensor flag color for unresolved or unclassified events. All 3 were in areas with thin patrol coverage. All 3 had been logged, flagged, and left in a queue somewhere. 3 anomalies, I said. Yes, Sabi said. Which one first? A pause. Then, with something in the voice that was new and warm and entirely itself, surprised me. I put my hands on the controls. The console glowed. The engine nodes sang their low, living note through the floor of the cradle. Bay 31's clamps released with a clean mechanical thunk, and the lights of Verith Station began to fall away behind us as we moved out into the open. Navigation is yours, I said. Calculating, Savi said. Outside the viewport, the stars were very bright. The distance was very large. And for the first time in a long time, that was exactly what I wanted it to be.